Welcome to our learning and listening session on Climate Action Plan Basics, hosted by the Sustainable Cities Network in collaboration with the City of Tempe. Thank you, Braden Kay and Grace Logan, as well as the School of Sustainability, Hatcha Verdiers, and then ASU's Center for Emergency Management and Homeland Security, which is Melanie Gall and Brian Gerber. My name is Ann Richmond. I am director of ASU's Sustainable Cities Network, and so a special greeting and thank you for attending today. Today's presentation is the start of an entire panel series, which we've had our eye on for a really long time, addressing how cities, towns, and communities throughout Arizona can plan and implement climate action and resilience plans. We'll let you know of future meetings where we can to take a deeper dive into our climate action plan strategies, as well as some of the unanswered questions that might be posed at today's discussion. We also have a parallel panel series titled Connecting Emergency Management and Sustainability, Policies, Practices, and Actions, taking place this fall. You'll notice on the screen there are two different tracks, one on climate action planning and one on hazard mitigation planning. And the hazard mitigation planning one centers around connecting emergency management and sustainability actions to ensure resilience. We have an upcoming panel coming up in September, which will look at all hazards mitigation planning, and it'll set the stage for future panel discussions. So we will certainly keep you posted on those opportunities so that you can all join us if interested. A couple of Zoom housekeeping items today. If you are not on the panel and presenting, as I mentioned, please keep yourself on mute. We have a large attendee base today, and if I notice somebody's making a whole lot of noise, I'll probably mute you automatically. So if you're on your phone and want to speak later during the Q&A, you'd want to press *6 to unmute yourself, and then you can use your phone controls after that. Also, as a courtesy to our presenters, with as many attendees as we have, it's probably a good idea if you want to turn your video off once the presentation starts. That also helps with any bandwidth or buffering issues. And then, of course, we just ask you in advance for any understanding in case we have any technical glitches. I don't anticipate any Zoom bombing because I pretty much have handled all the RSVPs, but if for some reason we do get a disruptive Zoom bomber, we'll probably just end the meeting and then try to rejoin selectively after that. So with that, I'd like to introduce our moderators for today's panel discussion. A colleague and former coworker, Braden Kay, who's the Sustainability Director for the City of Tempe, and then Fatima Luna, who is the Environmental and Sustainability Advisor for the City of Tucson. So with that, I will turn it over to Braden and Fatima so they can get our panel discussion started.
Awesome, thank you, Ann. This is so exciting. We really have an opportunity in the next hour to get a sense of how different cities around Arizona are taking on climate action and climate action planning. It's an honor to be able to co-host this session with Fatima today. Fatima, you want to say hi?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. This is very exciting. So yeah, we're excited to get started.
Awesome. So the way that we're going to do this today is Fatima and I are both going to take about 3 to 5 minutes to tell you a little bit about what's happening in our own cities. Then you're going to hear the two main presentations, Nicole Antonopoulos in Flagstaff and Rosanne Albright in Phoenix, about climate work that they're taking on. Then Fatima and I will ask a few questions. Then we actually have a waterfall set of questions for everyone that's here. We're so excited you're all here today. We're close to 100 people, which is just great for a Sustainable Cities Network and School of Sustainability event. Just really appreciate having you here today. So I'll jump in. I'll do a few minutes on Tempe, and then we'll go to Fatima, and then we'll introduce our two main speakers. So we have been doing a series of listening sessions to help figure out how we do collaboration around climate action in Tempe. one of the things that we're realizing about climate action is it's not a single plan. It's an opportunity for a government to build partnerships and help build the climate movement in our city, in our region, and in our state. And so in order to invigorate our next set of climate work after our first climate plan, we've been having these listening sessions with key stakeholders around our community to help move forward the climate movement in Tempe. Next slide. So we're really interested in moving forward equitable climate actions that best serve our community and address structural racism and inequality in our city. And then we're looking for partnerships on both decarbonization in both our energy system and in our transportation systems, as well as building a movement to become more resilient to extreme heat. Next. So we've had an equity fellow from the USDN this summer who's been really helping us define and think about, well, what is equitable climate action and how we sort of understand that social justice and climate justice are the same type of work, and that we aren't really doing climate work if we're not tackling racial inequity and then we're not tackling social justice issues. Next slide. And here are some of the examples that we never necessarily think of as climate action, but cooling stations, bus stops, asthma testing, educating low-income families about environmental hazards in their home. There's an opportunity to make climate action relevant to all residents in our cities, and that's part of what equitable climate action is about. Next slide. So we did our first climate action plan in Tempe. I really call it a training wheels plan. We had 3 focus areas, energy, transportation, resilience to extreme heat, and 12 actions that our Sustainability Commission whittled down to these 4 important highlight actions, including resilient energy hubs to really talk about how we have more buildings in our city that have solar with battery backup, especially where citizens need cooling centers and need that the most, as well as really thinking about transportation demand management. And we have a few folks from the City of Tempe planning team, both from long-term planning and transportation planning on the phone today, that have been incredible partners in this work. And we've also been using it as an opportunity to advance green infrastructure and hopefully one day catch up to Scottsdale with the amazing work they do on green construction code. Next slide. So these are the 6 groups in our next phase of work that we're really trying to focus on. And we've been doing listening sessions with business leaders in our Chamber of Commerce, with environmental leaders, with our Equity in Action group, which is a funded grant project we have to really listen to social justice leaders and neighborhood leaders in Tempe. We've been had an amazing 30 or 40 person session with our youth, and there's a lot of youth energy in Tempe that we're hoping to help take advantage of in our future work. Next slide. Go ahead. Next slide. These are some of the questions we've been asking stakeholders, some of the ways that we're trying to foster collaboration. Next slide. And the last thing I'll leave you with is we really are trying to focus our work around these guiding principles. How do we take climate action in a way that's fiscally responsible, centers equity, does engagement in a way that our residents can touch and feel climate action, in a way that supports enterprise and social enterprise, B corporations, and new ways of doing business as a part of realizing that we need to develop a clean energy economy and an economy that practices social justice. And then also working on evidence and effectiveness. And we've had some great partnerships with ASU on how do we measure extreme heat? How do we understand the impacts? So that's been another really important part of the work. So with that, I'll hand it over to Fatima for you to learn a little bit more about what they're doing in Tucson.
Thank you so much. Again, I would just like to introduce myself again. Fatima Luna, my pronouns are she and her. I am the Environmental Sustainability Advisor to Mayor Regina Romero in Tucson. And today I am actually zooming in from my home in South Tucson, which are traditional lands of the Tohono O'odham people. And just to give you a little bit of background, I joined the mayor's office early this year as the pandemic was beginning to take place, and my role is to move forward her environmental and sustainability agenda. And in specific, I would be leading the development and also help implement a climate action and adaptation plan for the city. So despite the many challenges resulting from the global pandemic, we have been able to make some headway in climate action. With majority vote, the City of Tucson Mayor and Council secured $250,000 to support the development of a climate action plan. This was a tremendous win for our city. And as we develop the climate action plan, we would follow a set of guiding principles, including making a formal commitment to combat climate change by declaring a climate emergency, setting bold carbon reduction goals, and implementing mitigation strategies that not only focus on the energy, transportation, and waste sectors, but also include nature-based solutions such as massive tree planting through the mayor's Tucson Million Trees initiative, as well as having adaptation strategies that are like people-centered and build community resilience. Building community resilience must address specific experiences and the needs of frontline communities. And we know that climate change does not affect the people equally or the same. People of color, immigrants, indigenous communities, excuse me, low-income communities, people with disabilities, they're all disproportionately affected by climate change, although they contribute the least to the problem. And for that reason, the entire climate action plan will, in the entire climate action plan, we would use a just and equitable transition framework to identify strategies and actions to support the shift to an economy that is not only like ecologically sustainable and economically sustainable, but that is also equitable and just for all of its members. And in doing so, we want to align our strategies and actions with the ongoing climate action and sustainability efforts within the city government and also with external partners to avoid duplicating efforts and maximize resources, but also results. And lastly, we want to be intentional in engaging the Tucson community and frontline communities in the planning process. The final plan should reflect the strategies, the actions that are important to the most vulnerable communities, or those communities that are impacted the most by climate change.
Thank you so much, Fatima. The City of Tucson is so lucky to have you, and I know that this plan is going to be able to build on a lot of the great work that Tucson has been doing, and it's really exciting to hear the work that you're helping spearhead there. So now we're going to head to Nicole, who is a true leader in sustainability, has the longest standing Office of Sustainability in the state of Arizona, and passed the first climate plan in the state of Arizona. Tempe was the second, but Flagstaff was the first. So now you're going to get to hear from Nicole about how they handled their action plan that got passed in the last 2 years.
Great. Good morning, everybody. And thank you so much, Braden and Anne and Fatima and Grace, for the invitation and the opportunity to present on our climate action and adaptation plan, which was adopted in November of 2018. And just for reference, yes, as Braden alluded to, I have been in my position as Sustainability Director since 2007. And I'm really proud of the work that we've been able to do here in Flagstaff, and to hopefully be a resource to anyone that is looking to follow in these footsteps. Next slide, please. So what I'd like to do is just share with you essentially the path we took since 2017 to get to where we are today. And then share with you a few updates that have happened in the last few months. And hopefully that will lend itself to some more questions. So in 2017, we officially got support from our Flagstaff City Council to actually take our climate work to the community. We essentially, for lack of better terms, had to backdoor a lot of our climate action work because we didn't have the support from leadership or on the dais. And so we did a lot of programming and policy development, but we never brought it under the umbrella of a climate action and adaptation plan. And in 2017, we did get the go-ahead from the former city council to take meaningful climate action. And we took that opportunity and ran with it. So what we focused on was developing a climate action plan and also becoming a renewable energy city organization and community, and we can dive into that a little bit later. Incorporating financial divestment from fossil fuels, and then really working on the legislative piece in terms of state and federal legislative action that we could take as a city organization focusing on combating climate change. And then also updating the energy code. And for those of you that are working on climate action, you likely recognize the importance of these 5 bullets moving forward and what that could mean in terms of advancing climate action. Next slide. So this is our climate action and adaptation plan development timeline. We move quickly, folks. We started in the winter of 2017 and we finished in the fall of 2018. And what you can see here is just really how we worked on this simultaneously. There were a number of initiatives underway, and I was fortunate enough to have an incredible team to work with in terms of city staff, Jenny Neiman, who is our climate and energy specialist, our AmeriCorps Vistas, as well as an incredible amount of community involvement. And I'll talk about that here in just a second. But as you see here on the slide, we started technical analysis. Simultaneously, we were working on vulnerability assessments. And then as we moved from the winter into the spring, we very much focused on community engagement and developing goals and strategies. And then in the summer of 2018, we started doing impact analyses as well as implementation planning, and then hit it hard to get the draft out for public review and feedback, and then brought the plan forward to our city council in late November of 2008. And I'm going to fly through a couple of these. My hope was in putting this presentation together that it can be a resource for folks if they're looking for local, regional resources. And so some of these slides may seem a bit elementary, but I think that it can be helpful depending on who your audience is. So one thing that we constantly talked about when we were bringing forward the Climate Action and Adaptation Plan is why we need one. And essentially, as most of us know on the call, that climate change poses risks to everything, our physical and emotional health, our economic health, our infrastructure, and our ecosystems. And of course, the benefits are broad, and from enhancing our local ecosystems and recreational opportunities, which can cascade into improving the quality of our life, as well as the local economy, and supporting low-income and disadvantaged communities was at the forefront of our plan's goals. And of course, promoting healthier lifestyles and focusing on public health. So one thing that we focused on is that we can use this climate action and adaptation plan to help answer questions and how things will change over time. How will those changes impact our community, our economy, and of course, our most vulnerable residents. In addition, we focused on how can we prepare for those changes and how will we pay for it? And then how can we turn this into a benefit for our community? So what I'd like to do next is just walk you through the plan development. So our first step was to define how the climate is changing. We had the wonderful opportunity to continue our work with CLEMAS from U of A, and they helped, they actually conducted our climate impact assessment and looked at our climate profile, we decided to focus this profile not just on the City of Flagstaff, but the entire county. And of course, to hopefully be a resource for our friends and neighbors in the county as they continue on their trajectory to look at climate change and overall sustainability. One thing that we focused on in our communication with the public is we're not here to talk about why climate change is happening, but we do know it's happening. And for us, as you see in this circle data set, we recognize and we note that our annual average temperatures are not dropping below a certain level, just over 52 degrees with consistency. This is incredibly problematic for us in a mountain community up in northern Arizona. By 2050, we expect in Coconino County to have, and no surprise, I'm sure, hotter temperatures, lower snowpack, less healthy forests, and drier conditions. So step 2 is that we needed, we needed to acknowledge that everyone has a role in climate action. And I really liked what Braden said, that climate action has to be relevant to all. And so as we were working through the community, we had to, this was at the forefront of our strategy, is to make this tangible and to really start conversations off with, have you noticed that the climate's changing in Flagstaff? And starting to have that conversation. In many of the meetings that I was in, I would essentially introduce myself and share how long I've been in Flagstaff and what I've noted as perceived changes and how those impact me as an individual and me as a professional.
And this is just a 2-minute warning.
Okay, well, I'll keep going. Thank you. So essentially, we wanted this to be a community plan, and it was driven by our community from the very onset of when we got direction from City Council to move forward. I created a steering committee to talk, I hosted a public meeting to start talking about what does climate action look like in Flagstaff. And from there, put out an invitation for people to apply to be on a committee that developed the scope of work for our climate action and adaptation plan consultants. And then from there, we took applications for members of the steering committee. And I will let you know that in this process, I had most of these meetings facilitated and was a representative at the table rather than the driver at the table. We, throughout these process of developing the plan, we engaged more than 1,000 residents, which in Flagstaff is a really impressive thing. Not only did we have the steering committee, we hosted numerous open houses, we had online community surveys, we had monthly newsletters, we hosted coffee and climate throughout pretty much every coffee shop in town. And a lot of the questions evolved around what do you value most about Flagstaff? And what are you concerned about? And what actions do you want to see? So these are just the results of our surveys and our open houses. And keep in mind, our open houses were not the typical open houses that at least the City of Flagstaff had historically used. We essentially hosted open houses at 7 in the morning, on weekends at 7 p.m. at night. We used community centers and put up displays that would allow people to leave notes, and we engaged with our steering committee and asked them to be available, essentially hosting office hours when these displays were up. And what you can see here is just the results of what we are learning. This is the pulse of our community. That bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure was critical, transit improvements, renewable energy, waste, compost, recycling. None of these are a big surprise, but the data is incredibly relevant and help shape our strategies and actions. And then the next step was to address both mitigation and adaptation. And without diving in my last maybe 60 seconds, but mitigation obviously is the focus on reducing greenhouse gas emissions, while adaptation is preparing for climate change impacts. And this is a continuous loop, which creates the resiliency. So this is Flagstaff's greenhouse gas emission profile. Again, not surprising and pretty consistent with what we see in most communities throughout the US, but this helped us target exactly where we need to identify our mitigation strategies. And then obviously the adaptation piece was preparing for what's coming. And we really needed to identify our greatest vulnerabilities to the negative impacts of climate change. We needed to identify what populations and neighborhoods in our community are the most vulnerable, and where do we already have adaptive capacity and community resiliency to try to tackle those challenges. So we looked at and conducted a vulnerability assessment, and the considerations that we put in place were these 5 that are listed: water supply, forest health, tourism, land use and infrastructure, housing affordability, and public health. And then step 4, we wanted to build on the work that's already being done throughout the city and the community. This should never be overlooked as we're developing a climate plan. And then step 5 was setting ambitious overarching goals. At the time, we did focus on an 80 by 50 goal, as well as so we had a mitigation goal, an adaptation goal, and an equity goal. And in theory, this is what should be used to drive all policies and decisions and programs within the organization. And then step 6 was developing the strategies and actions across our 7 focus areas that address Flagstaff's situation. And then step 7 was to analyze potential impacts of the plan. So this is our business as usual. This is the CAP goals, which we recognize is based off of our 2016 baseline, that our plan only would get us to 60% rather than 80%. But we also acknowledge that new technologies and new strategies and actions would be continuously evolving throughout this time frame. And then here's our wedge analysis. This is the area where we need to focus our attention and invest in if we are going to achieve the 80 by 50. And then step 8 was creating a detailed implementation plan or strategy rather. And we wanted to communicate with the community that the first 18 months of the plan are going to be a lot of internal updates and operational changes. So they focused on leadership, budget process, incredibly important, internal planning and capacity building, plan updates like the regional plan, zoning code, and then of course, community outreach. Okay, so with that in mind, back in June, the city actually passed a climate emergency. And so now we have a carbon neutrality goal of carbon neutrality by 2030. So everything I just talked to you guys about, we've started all over again. So with Braden on the screen, I know my time is up, and I hope that I can answer some questions for the group later in the call.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Nicole. As you can see, we hope to have Nicole on for a separate session this winter so that Arizona cities can do a deep dive into the work that Flagstaff has done. And then we'll have some opportunity for questions. Up next, another one of my mentors and one of my favorite sustainability leaders in Arizona, Rosanne Albright, is going to tell us about the climate action plan work that's happening as we speak in the city of Phoenix. Thanks, Rosanne.
Thank you, Braden, and thanks to everyone on the call for allowing us to share what we're doing in Phoenix. And I'm lucky to learn from the efforts of both Flagstaff and Tempe. Looks like we're going to be number 3 on this climate action plan, but that's still a good place to be. So I want to share with you today a little bit of what we're actually facing right now as we're developing our plan. So we originally started way back, it's been a while, since the mid-2000s when we started thinking about greenhouse gas emissions and climate action planning. But it wasn't until 2015, under the guidance of Mark Hartman as our Chief Sustainability Officer, that we developed our environmental sustainability goals, which were 8 goals, one of which, the overarching goal, is to be a carbon neutral city by 2060. Included in that is a goal to reduce GHG emissions by 2025 of 30%. So we're right around the corner from that on a community scale effort. So just to give you a little bit of an idea of the kinds of work that we've been doing, as I mentioned, we started climate action planning back in 2005 or so. We did our first climate action plan in 2009 and our city operations. And we started with a pretty conservative goal of 5% by 2015. On the top of this graphic, you're looking at, in the blue squares, the GHG inventories we've done over the years, and on the bottom are the GHG community scale inventory. So to date, we started including our since 2012, the community inventory, which has ultimately resulted in a goal of 30% reduction by 2025. During this time, we certainly have been doing work, and we have been promoting projects and implementing actions to reduce GHG emissions. Everything from methane capture at our landfills, transitioning our fleet to biodiesel and CNG, energy efficiency upgrades in all of our buildings and facilities. We've got solar energy that we're generating at many of our facilities. We have our SkyTrain that's helping us reduce fossil fuel. And a couple of years ago, we opened our 27th Avenue compost facility. And there's many more projects, but that's just a highlight of a few of them. We've also been looking at climate mitigation actions. So we have some current activities happening around our Phoenix Transportation 2050 program, including everything from light rail to bus route expansions, street improvements, walkable communities, all kinds of things under that effort. We've also just completed installation of LED lights on all of our traffic signals and street lights. And at our 27th Avenue wastewater treatment plant, we're converting biogas to renewable natural gas. On the adaptation side, we're working on increasing shade structures and trees. We actually have a pretty intensive effort happening right now to update our master tree and shade plan, and we have a committee under our Citizen Environmental Quality and Sustainability Commission that will be studying urban heat islands. They just finished a round of tree recommendations. So we're not quite at that million trees yet, but we're looking to definitely increase our canopy. Addressing heat with our cooling centers, and we're also looking at water with our new drought pipeline project that is bringing water and storing for future drought conditions. Next slide. And most recently, our mayor committed us to joining C40 Cities. So C40 Cities is a huge global network that's committed to tackling climate change. We joined in February along with Miami, and our mayor committed us to the Paris Climate, a C40 compliant climate action plan by the end of 2020. So as you can see, Flagstaff was on a pretty quick trajectory. We've even got a shorter time frame because just as we were announced as a C40 city, of course, the pandemic hit and we were delayed even a few months in being able to get started on this effort. Next slide. One of the big things that, of course, informs what we're going to be addressing in the climate plan is our greenhouse gas emissions inventory. So I just wanted to give you an opportunity to check on our website and you can see the entire report with all of the details, data, and graphics for our community scale inventory, just completed this year for 2018. Next slide. I just wanted to share with you one of the issues that we found was significant, and probably no surprise to folks on this call, is that transportation emissions is certainly an opportunity for us to reduce GHG emissions, especially when we found that motor vehicle gasoline really is the largest source of emissions. 36% of all community scale emissions in the city of Phoenix. Next slide. We also saw that we are able to reduce emissions through a less GHG intensive electricity grid through all of the work that's happening on a larger scale with APS and SRP. And one of the things that I want to mention that even though we only had a small reduction of 0.5% in GHG emissions, we did see an increase in our population and economic growth. So despite all of those increases, we still were able to realize a small but yet important reduction. Next slide. So to give you an idea of what our climate action plan is going to be looking like, I just wanted to share with you a few things. The Office of Environmental Programs is leading the effort, and I wanted to share, especially with those cities on the line, that we actually have an internal policy called an administrative regulation that outlines all the roles and responsibilities of the Office of Environmental Program, and climate change falls under that effort. And also because we're in the city manager's office, it gives us an opportunity to work with all city departments. And I would be remiss not to mention that our Office of Sustainability, Mark and all of his staff certainly are major partners as we put this climate action plan together. With the assistance from our city manager, we were able to have a climate liaison assigned from every city department to help us put together this plan. So it's really not the effort of just a couple of folks, it's really all of the city working together to put this plan together. We'll look at all of the traditional things: energy, transportation, waste, equity, and environmental justice, of course, a big portion, but we'll focus on things that are really important and are definitely affecting our residents: our water supply, heat, food systems, and air quality. Next slide. As we start to do this plan, because we're on such a quick trajectory to get it completed, we recognize that we need this plan to be flexible and adaptable, and that due to COVID and our timeline, we didn't do as much robust engagement as we wanted to. We will be continuing our virtual workshops through this fall, and next year we plan on really putting together some ad hoc committees made up of residents, businesses, and institutions to continue the engagement and to identify specific projects that would work at a neighborhood scale. Our plan is to update the climate action plan every 2 years, GHG inventory, so that we can continually improve in consideration of input and also any new technology, funding, and resources that may be out there. Next slide. Just to share with you a couple
kind 2-minute warning. Sorry for interrupting.
Thank you.
Thank
so
you.
Just to give you an idea of potential actions that we're exploring, will be to conduct a consumption-based GHG inventory in the future, looking at some pilot programs such as multimodal transit studies, looking at the adoption of clean zones, certainly increasing electric vehicles, and developing a regional resiliency plan. Before we started our climate action plan, we started talking to Maricopa Association of Governments and also to Maricopa County Air Quality Division, as well as several cities, about the idea of doing a regional plan that focuses on air quality, ozone in particular, and heat. And so I think we still have some traction with that and hope to continue to push towards that direction. So next slide. I just want to let you know that we are continuing outreach, as I mentioned. We do have the survey open right now that residents in Phoenix and also outside of Phoenix, that you can go in and participate in and give us your feedback. It'll close in about a week or so, but it's still available. Next slide. And so as a city, we certainly have to get that buy-in from our elected officials, and we intend to have our draft available in September for public comment. For about 30 days, we will be in front of our Transportation, Infrastructure, and Innovation Council Subcommittee in October, with the goal to have it adopted in November and December by Council. And as I mentioned, in 2021, we'll start implementing some of those short-term actions, and again, continuing our engagement, continual progress, making continual improvements over the next years. And finally, the last slide is just some contact information. If you have any comments and questions we don't get to here, best place to go is to address them to climate@phoenix.gov. And we also have a staff lead from Office of Environmental Programs, Dr. Matthew Poplar, whose information is here as well. That is really the hard worker putting all of this effort together. So thank you so much for allowing us to share that, and look forward to hearing from some of you in the future. Thank you.
Rosanne, I specifically, enjoy them, and they're very useful for cities like Tucson that are beginning that process. So thank you for sharing that wisdom. I want to ask you a couple questions. So the first one is, as you were developing your climate action and adaptation plans, how do you included, and both of you really alluded to these, but if you can talk a little bit more in detail, how you included or consider equity and frontline communities in the process.
Fatima, I'm sorry, you checked out for a little bit on my end. Was that a question for me?
Yes, Roxanne, actually, can you answer that question? And I have one for a specific for Nicole that I think it would be very useful for other cities as well.
So the question was for Rosanne. Is she still on the line?
Okay, hi, I'm still here. Yes, so in response to that, we definitely recognize that, especially given COVID and some of the things that we've been seeing, and also knowing there are existing efforts out there with regards to getting input from communities that are most affected by heat, we will continue to focus on those communities through partnerships and collaborations with community and grassroots organizations. There's already been a lot of great work that has been done on the heat side. We have a Heat Ready program that is being led by Mark in the Office of Sustainability. And the equitable community engagement work that we've done as we developed our food action plan is a good model that will help us as we continue to actually develop relationships with residents that are most impacted by these issues. So we've established what we call a community of practice on the food side, and it is certainly a possibility that we might use that same model as we move forward on gathering input from the climate action plan. We also recognize business is important as well, especially small businesses. So that is another aspect of our reaching out to those communities most impacted. And that's all going to take place in 2021.
That is awesome. Thank you for sharing. And we'll definitely be following some of your steps. So thanks for being pioneers in that sense. And also, Nicole, I think that the City of Flagstaff has done a great job as well in that aspect. I do have a question for you, Nicole. You know, over 1,500 governments around the world really have declared a climate emergency, which is basically a piece of legislature passed by a government body to basically formalize or put in the record the commitment to take climate action to reserve the global warming. Mayor Regina Romero has expressed interest in declaring a climate emergency in Tucson. And I know that Flagstaff, you mentioned it's recently declared a climate emergency. So what advice, Nicole, would you give cities that are considering making this commitment? What is the best way to go about that? You know, what are the benefits? In your specific case, what is the purpose, or what are the aspects that were highlighted in your climate emergency?
So do I have a whole hour to answer those questions? I think that's really loaded. So let me just do it. I'll do a quick synopsis, and then here's my shameless plug that I would love to come back and talk in more depth about the climate emergency declaration. I will just share with the folks on the call that the climate emergency declaration was community seated, and this was an effort literally that started back in September of 2019, and it was driven by the Flagstaff community. So I have the benefit of really riding that wave, and the Flagstaff community voice in bringing the climate emergency forward was just incredible. I would say that the thing that is incredibly important is when I had the conversations with City Council, that it was raw. And I continue to emphasize that if the council adopted this resolution and declared a climate emergency, that bold and immediate action has to be taken, and that it requires system change, and it is going to be a heavy lift, and that the council had to commit to that. And it's going to test a lot of things that are existing plans and policies, and it's also going to require continuity and consistency for the electeds in when they're making policy decisions. With that said, we had 8 key focus of our emergency declaration, and that we needed to focus on a dramatic increase in the ambition to combat climate change, that it has to commit to citywide transition and to climate emergency mobilization. It also commits to educating our residents, especially our youth. And it underscores the need for full community participation, as well as keeping our vulnerable communities at the forefront of all decision making. And it also required, obviously, advancing the goals of our climate action and adaptation plan, which I alluded to already, that we are currently, we reinvigorated our steering committee, we've brought on more committee members, and we are going through this process all over again, the process that I briefly shared with you. And it also really calls on nationwide mobilization and all governments to initiate a transition. My hope is that Flagstaff has, if you will, opened the door for more communities to walk through in the state of Arizona, because if we can really use that collective voice and elevate the discussion about the emergency, the better off we'll all be.
Thank you, Nicole. And there's no question that the work that you've been doing in Flagstaff has been leading the way, and the rest of us have a lot to learn from you, and keep pushing. We need you to be out there doing new things so that we all have things to aspire to. So thank you, Nicole. Really appreciate it.